So Beverly clearly said, if you don't see the book you want on the shelf, write it. Looks like I left a word out there, but if you don't see the book you want on the shelf, then write it. I also want to suggest something to you. Benjamin Franklin said, either write something worth reading or live something worth writing. So I tell my authors all the time, you got to live juicy to write juicy. And that means that as you're in the writing journey, to enjoy connections, to be experiencing life, to be going out in nature, to creating extraordinary human connections. It's really easy for a writer to feel solitary and alone. So get with writers groups, do what we do. We have an inspired circle of connection and inspiration. And it's wonderful for authors to talk with other authors because there are a lot of hours whirled away, whittled away all on your own. And you just want to make sure that you're not alone and that you're working on something extraordinary. Yesterday, I also received some questions about the retreat. And so I wanted to let you know we always have a beautiful place to meet. This one is going to be our retreat in February. We always have a large space for teaching. We take only a small amount of students. And we have private rooms as well as shared rooms for a little more of a discounted price. This one is a brand new property on Lake Yuba. It's about an hour and a half south of Salt Lake City, easy to fly into. And we purposely did one that was not up in the mountains because not everyone can drive in February in the mountains. And so, and other places we do Bear Lake in the summertime on a beautiful property on the most beautiful turquoise water you've ever seen, except maybe in the ocean. So just so that you're aware, those are some of the semantics, and Raven can answer questions for you if you have any, but I want to get right into your workbook and your learning. And so there's another workbook for today. And so Raven is popping that into the chat. And then if you're having any trouble downloading that, please just be sure to email her and she will email you a PDF copy of that workbook. So detailed roadmap adventure. Obviously, we're going to be covering a lot of material today, just like yesterday. There will be a few things that is going to be an overlap because some of you would just want to skip to this part. And we have a couple of you who are here just for this. So there will be a little tiny bit of overlap, but it's all geared for a different kind of writing. So all authors take that same path that we were talking about, then you split up by genre, and then you split your tree up just a little bit more when you decide which way you're going to publish. So we're going to get into some deep, detailed, beautiful things about inspirational memoir and autobiography. And again, you want to have that perfect vehicle to drive. So it's something definitely to think about. We read this quote yesterday, but I just want to reinforce that the book that will most change your life is the book that you will write. We're going to really get into that today. Okay. So, your self-story introduction. In memoir or autobiography, there is a difference between writing self-help where you have just got to get all your credibility in the door on the very first thing. In self-story, anything of the genres that we're talking about today, it's going to be building in your story. You don't start with it because you didn't have it to begin with. You learned it along the way. And this type of writing is where your principles are beautifully wrapped within your story because of how you learned, when you learned, and what you learned in such dramatic and beautiful fashion that a reader can be in your shoes and then recognize their resiliency, their ability to overcome, their sheroes and heroes journey wrapped inside the gifts of your story. And so I'm going to invite you to trust that. You will have writing that helps to explain your credibility. So what's written on the back cover, what's written on your Amazon blurb, what's written on your website, what's written on your landing page for your book, what's written in your biography, and hopefully each of you will start to develop a Wikipedia as well. But those are the sources that will give that immediate credibility. And so it's important that your bio on your book and your website be extraordinary, okay? So here's what I'm going to suggest. I had a mentor who said, act as if every word cost you $500. I was like, what? And she's like, I'm serious. And part of it was probably like a lot of you, I was really good at writing other people's stuff. Like they could tell me things, I could write things down, I could make it just so delicious and juicy and compelling. My own stuff, oh man, I had the hardest time. But when she did that, it shifted because all of a sudden I recognized even for myself my own value and the value of my own words. And so I'm going to invite you to begin to trust that as well. And so it's great for you to sketch things out, but at some point also to go back and rewrite and make things deep and rich and juicy. And I want you to be thinking about, for today, the elements of you that make you uniquely you. The elements of you that if someone did not know this, then they wouldn't understand you. You're going to have a bigger platform for which to explain yourself. And here's an important thing. Sometimes when people are healing from something, they start off wanting to write a book to explain themselves, and there is a validation and sometimes a vindication for why they want to write a book. And that healing is awesome that takes place because it's meaning you have a voice and maybe it's been shut down. Maybe others didn't believe you, understand you, misinterpreted you, and so you want to explain it. There's nothing wrong with that. But vindication, meaning I will show you, is a real energy, and it is also an energy that can get in the way. And so one of the beautiful things is to write out those areas where you must vindicate yourself and see it in black and white for yourself. And release that energy so that when you go back to do your rewrite for your avatar, that it is the strongest, purest, most compelling. And that through the beauty of your story, there actually will be vindication, validation, all of the credibility that you deserve. But that is not your intention for writing all of it in the first place. You will see that instead of like, I have to explain myself, there will be, I get to express myself. And there's a completely different energy with that. So begin to trust that and have some fun with it. If you have anger, frustration, rage, sadness, other deep emotions that come up during this process, good on you. You're supposed to. This is, remember our quote about Anais Nin yesterday, we write to taste life twice, but it is also then the gift you give yourself, because sometimes when we go through difficult things, trauma, divorce, separation, situations, family drama, all these things, sometimes we're so busy protecting ourselves and surviving that we did not feel the depth of the emotion the first time. I worked on a very difficult and powerful story about a woman called Rebecca Musser. She was the 19th wife of 65 women, and she was married to the prophet of the FLDS church, which had become an organized crime unit in the name of God, but had 10,000 followers who didn't know it. They were God-fearing people, and they just grew up wanting to please God and please their prophet. But her husband, who was more than 4 times her age, she was this innocent 19-year-old, just barely turned 19, had never even kissed a boy. And she was forced to marry this man older than her grandfather. And so when we began to write her book, and we had to start at an early age, some memoirs, and we'll get into the difference between a memoir and an autobiography, but specifically for memoirs, some memoirs start when you are a child. Some memoirs start when you're a teenager. Some memoirs start when you're an adult, because it depends on the thread that you're weaving through. For her particular story, if we did an autobiography, there would be enough for 3 volumes of this incredible woman's story. But we did a memoir so that people could have a strong thread of meaning to follow, a specific period of time, and that they could see her growing up in this culture and then marrying this old man and having to learn geriatric care on her wedding night. Here's the funny thing is she said, I only had to be on duty 1 out of every 19 nights. And then very soon, once every 2 months or so. But the thing of it is, she had humor. She had all of these things that she got to experience and write about again. But there were things where in the moment she was surviving, because when Warren Jeffs took over after her husband died, and he started marrying off girls to himself and his own daughters for power, 15, 14, 13, and 12-year-old girls. And this did not sit well with her. And she had 2 little sisters who were destined to become child brides. And she had to write about that. And she had to write about her crazy escape past security guards and gates and cameras in her long dresses and underwear. And this 4-state manhunt that Warren Jeffs sent after her. And then getting out into a different world, the outside world, where she'd been taught that it wasn't if, but when someone would hurt you. And here's the thing is that she disentangled a little at a time from all of those crazy beliefs that she was taught. And some of you might be in that same situation to a small degree or to a large degree, depending on where you come from. But as we went back through her memoir, the pieces that were going to be important for her memoir, it was emotional. It was difficult because she'd been surviving for so long. And now she had to sit down and write it. So some of you may feel those emotions rise up in you. That is good. Because number one, it heals you. And then number two, you become this force for good in the world, this force for compassion and understanding. And it will also allow you to write those emotions. When it comes to memoir or autobiography, a lot of times we want to do this thing like, oh, I'm scooting along in life and ping, all of a sudden unicorns and rainbows, and everybody should see this great overcoming that I've done, but you've only done this. And what we're going to be talking about today is that the human journey is full of rises and falls, including a dark night of your soul and a rise to your climax that is real and genuine and gorgeous and beautiful. And because of that, it's important for you to be able to write that gamut of emotions. So when it comes up, love it, accept it. Whenever you can, sit down and write it. It may not go into your book and in that exact format, but the expression of your emotions and your memories is vital. And this makes for the most delicious, world-changing storytelling that I can even share with you. So trust that. Trust you, okay? And it's going to mean that you're going to retrace your steps in life, okay? And I do want you to know you're in the right place. Today is this sacred space that we have created. There's going to be a little bit of sharing and discussion. There's going to be more of that map because I know that's what you came for. And to just feel at home today as you explore yourself, okay? And just to recognize, like, sometimes vehicles get broken down and that's okay. It's this path that we're on. Now, yesterday we talked about voice, so I'm just going to skip through this just a little, but why am I repeating a few things? Because now your focus is not on self-help, it's on your own personal story. This is all about you, all about your story. And in memoir, more than anything else, your voice, not someone else's, is really paramount, okay? And now we have this question in authority, right? In memoir and autobiography, it's built into the story you tell. So I know I said that already. And the reason I'm reiterating it is that each of you inside has a deep inner calm voice. So there's emotions and there's drama and there's all the things that you live through, but there is that deep inner calm voice, and that will be the one that you will rely on, that will help you through those times where you say, I don't dare share this, or what's going to happen to me if I shared this. So I want to tell you a little bit about Melissa. She was the daughter of the serial killer that ended up going on Oprah and Dr. Phil. In her memoir, which was not salacious, and we did not include horrific details of what her father did, we told the emotional journey of a girl who grows up with a mother and father that become estranged, get divorced, and dad is like this hero when he comes into town, because where she's living with her mother and often grandmother, she has very little to eat. She has shoe boxes for dresser drawers. She has a cot that she and her brother and her sister are sleeping on in the cellar of her grandmother's little home up in Washington. Dad pulls into town from a truck. He brings groceries and fills the cupboards and buys her clothes so that she doesn't look like a pauper when she goes to school. So dad's a hero. Until one day, one evening, she's down in the cellar with her brother and sister, and they're saying goodnight to each other. And mom opens the cellar door, comes down about halfway, no eye contact whatsoever. And she says, kids, you need to know that your father is in prison. And then she turned around to walk away. And Melissa's like, oh, wait a minute. And her brother says, Mom, what for? She said, for murder. And then she kept walking and shut the door. Never expressed anything, never talked to her kids. So as a teenager, Melissa discovers from going to the library and looking at newspapers that her father has been arrested for being a serial killer. And he admitted to 180 deaths. Now we know that there's evidence of 8. He has a bigger ego than anyone I've ever met. And he's a true sociopath. We wrote about this emotional story for her. We wrote about what it was like for her to discover this and for people to treat her differently, because again, we say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And then what happened one day when her little daughter comes skipping home from school and she says, Mommy, we learned about daddies in school today, and everybody's got a daddy. Where's your daddy? Melissa's like, ooh. She said, he's in Salem, honey. And her daughter goes, okay. And Aspen goes skipping off to play. And Melissa's like, oh, my heavens. I was thinking I was going to have this discussion with my daughter when she was a teenager or a young adult, but not now. What do I do? He is in Salem, in a penitentiary for life. How do I tell my daughter when I've been telling her there's no monsters under the bed, that we have a monster in the closet, a family monster in the closet? And so she went looking for resources. She went to libraries and she went to the bookstore and she was looking, and she found out, like, if you're a victim of a crime, there are thousands of resources to assist you. But if you love someone who has committed heinous crimes and you were wallowing in this confusion and fear of what to do and where to place your feet, there's nothing out there. So Melissa wrote the book that she could not find on the shelf eventually. And as I mentioned, she's become a producer and an incredible leader in her own right. And so each of you have a unique voice. And I deal a lot with extreme stories. That's my forte. That's my genre of memoir, of depths of hell, and have come out on the other side and now able to be incredible leaders in the community. Now, some of you might say, well, I didn't marry a polygamist. I don't have a serial killer for a father. I think I don't have a story. Oh, yes, you do. I'm going to share with you, I have never, ever come across a person in my life that doesn't have an extraordinary story. When they start to put themselves down on paper and realize, oh, there is so much more to me than I ever realized. And we all have dark evenings and dark nights of the soul. We all have rises and persistence. And you're here because you have something extraordinary to say. And it all has to do with the language, because we all feel the same emotions. So no matter how extreme or more mild the story is, you're still going to have rises and falls. We're going to get into why that's just so vitally important. Remember, you don't have to shout it out loud. And in this place, I want you to see that you have an ability to be an influencer that's authentic, that that speaks from the heart. The world will tell you it has to look a certain way. And so you might go out and look at leaders and see what they're doing. And your gut, as well as your brilliant mind, are going to start to work together to share with you what your deepest story is without it having to be too hard or too outside your comfort zone or something that you are not. Again, just be you. Now, when you're doing this type of work, memoirs are often where people will, just as much as self-help, be asked to speak. And it's really important that you start to develop this tone towards the audience. So you're going to be friendly, intimate, authoritative. The most important for you as a memoir or autobiography writer is a victor. Okay. So if you preach or condescend, people are not even going to listen to you. It's going to be very uncomfortable. And I've had people come from certain settings where there was a lot of preaching in their day, right? Like whether it was church related or parental related or culture related, like this is the way that it's supposed to be. Well, that will come out in your stories if you're not careful. The sharing of stories, instead of telling, the showing and the sharing of stories is where you won't have to worry and people will actually become more engaged. Okay. Now, here's the thing too. Sometimes we think, well, I have a really boring backstory, like it's everybody else's. It's so white bread, or it's so this, or it's so that. And doesn't everybody know this? The thing of it is nobody has lived in your exact history. Not a single person, not even your siblings. If we had 3 siblings write a book, they would have 3 different books to write, 3 different experiences of mom and dad, 3 different experiences of what was going on in the world, because even a couple of years think about like the Gulf War, or think about Afghanistan, or think about elections, or think about COVID, 2 years, that makes a huge difference in someone's life. And so you want to make sure that as you're weaving in backstory, that you don't leave out the things that have made you you. And you still want to have a pace as you're going along, but make sure you treat the reader as if they're smarter than you, meaning that they're going to pick up on things, but recognize they're not mind readers. And so don't discount anything from where you come from. Make sure that you're illustrating who you are and how your beliefs were made manifest. I have a gentleman that I'm working with on a book right now. He grew up on an Atlantic City boardwalk. His dad had a little restaurant on the boardwalk, and they were surrounded by these huge casinos, right? All along this place. So he sees drug dealers and hookers and pimps, and they all got flash and dash and cash, and they seem really cool for like 30 seconds. But then he notices like 6 months later, they're not anywhere around. But who is around? The casino owners. So he sees Trump and all these other people. And to him, as a young boy, they were cool because they continued to have a casino. They weren't, dispatched six months later. And the other thing that happened to him was at age 12, his father had a heart attack. And so this boy becomes an instant adult and takes over the restaurant and bar, acts as if he's older, has to manage the staff, the cash flow, bring the money home every night. And so this is how he's raised. But instead of him having the next several years to grow emotionally, he pretty much stays this 12-year-old in his emotional mindset for a while until he has something happen. And that's where some of the beauty of the story goes. So just like yesterday, especially with memoir, I want you to be thinking of, I have a core of story. I have a core of story. The gentleman that I'm talking to you about, his core of story is that he grew up with all the outer trappings supposed to be the coolest thing, and that's what he went after in life until he lost everything and was in the desert with his family and couldn't afford a Pop-Tart for his daughter. And the real meaning of life began to take hold and to shape him. So his core message is that all of this fluff and stuff, as fun as it is not the most important thing in life, and that there were greater principles and integrity and other things inside of him that he was learning to develop. You have, through your lived experience, some incredible things, and you're going to have one mighty core message, and then you're likely going to have a few messages dealt, inside of that. Okay. So for Rebecca Musser, she had a core of rebellion because she would see things and she didn't agree with it. So she found workarounds, and she always had a little bit of spunk and spice and flair. And Warren Jeff said, because at one time she told her husband no, she wasn't going to be on duty. And Warren came to her and he said, you never, ever, 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 ever tell your husband no, or you will be destroyed in the flesh. So she couldn't tell her husband no, but she didn't want to be violated in the name of God. So guess what she does? She has this spunky, sassy, flirty flair. And what she does is she takes EMT courses and she gets involved in the community and she creates all these pageants. And she's not around to be on duty. And so other people take over until her husband died. And that's why she knew she had to escape. So she has this core of her own sovereign autonomy as a woman in the world, no matter where you come from, that it is something to be cherished and respected. And that was not how she grew up. But she also had these threads of sass and flair. So do you know why we called it The Witness Wore Red? Is because Warren, the prophet pedophile leader, he outlawed the color red. No one in their community was allowed to wear red or have red cars or red toys or anything red. So Rebecca testified more than 20 times in a court of law. Every time she comes sashaying in a little bit of red or fully decked out in red. And when I saw her in the courtroom on the day that she had to face Warren Jeffs herself because he fired his attorneys, and the last time she saw him, he said, I will break you and I will train you to be a good wife. So she's got to meet this man who terrified her in the courtroom. But she came sashaying in this full suit of red. And it was her way of saying, you did not break me. And then in addition to that, as she turned around to be sworn in the galley, there was a sea of red. There were red ties on the AGs, the law enforcement officers. There were red roses and flowers in women's hair and red dresses in the galley to mark the fact that one woman could change the world. She was the witness that wore red. So you have stories, you have threads of stories that will help you to come down to a topic. If you're writing an autobiography, you're the topic, period. If you're writing a memoir, it's your adventure of discovering something within yourself. And so we'll get into that and discover that more. Yesterday, I was telling you about the 2 stories about polygamous women that came about at the same time. Here's mine, The Witness Wore Red with Rebecca Musser, and then it's not about the sex. So I'm just going to keep it at that. But I do want to tell you that since I deal with some really tender and terrible and wonderful transformational topics, I get a lot of people that have some abuse in their background. And we know that anywhere between 1 and 2 out of every 4 women on the planet have been abused in some way. In some areas of the world, it's really tough, like the women from Congo that I've taught. It's awful. We also know that 2 out of 4 men, so that means half of all the men that you know, at some time were abused physically, sexually, or emotionally, and that's a lot more than what most of society understands or thinks. Well, is this the essence of you? No. It is important to note that it did have an effect on you, especially if you're working on something that is life story related, okay? And so there could be 20 women who write a domestic violence overcoming story, and it will be a strong and compelling story if they actually in their character arc rose from victim to victor. And because of what they've been through, and it's these other threads of stories. So this core story, but there will be delicious other threads of story that make yours unique. So even if someone else is doing a memoir or an autobiography of the same thing, they're not you. So every time, trust who you are and own your author's voice is going to be really important. So you'll see, here's some award-winning, memorable works, okay? Over the Top, A Raw Journey to Self-Love. Know My Name, Chanel Miller. Homework, A Memoir of My Hollywood Years. Made, you may have heard of that one. Hard Work, Low Pay, and A Mother's Will to Survive. Then there's me, Elton John. Inheritance, a memoir, blah, blah, blah. So we go through this, and I just want you to see, just like as we discussed yesterday, you've got leadership, and there's all these multiple topics. Well, my darlings, guess what? You are the topic. And so when you think about your most important threads of story, you're going to start to come up with something unusual, unique, and just for you. So here is the woman that is just so extraordinary. And I want to share with you, she's been writing a book called Angel in Arlington. And it's taken her a while, but she grew up as a child who was orphaned by her father was killed in the U.S. Navy. And we didn't know if her father's killer was crazy or on drugs because the story said both. But all she knew was that when she was finally able to get her father's records, and the U.S. Navy was trying to keep them from her, and she was finding out from some of these men that served with her father what an incredible individual he was. She also found out that the Navy had been covering things up. And she found out that her father's killer was at large. She found a fax from one of the men that he had escaped from the U.S. Navy. She didn't know if he was somewhere out in the world and if he would be coming after her. And it was a frightening time for her. She had a lot of PTSD in growing up, not knowing if her father's killer would ever come after her. Here's this really cool thing of unlikely courage that Alicia found. One was she got some help from the other side. Her father guided and directed, gave her information that no one knew. The Navy didn't know, the friends of his didn't know, her mother didn't know. That was amazing. Another thread of her story was that she went up against the U.S. Navy and was able to win and have her father's records changed to reflect the truth. And then the second thing was facing her father's killer, which she did with a courageous and noble heart. So it's important for you to figure out, if you're doing first-person accounts, there's all of these different types that you could be into. Memoirs and autobiographies, and we'll explain the difference between those two. Then there's travel logs, narratives. Narrative nonfiction is also very close to memoir. There's creative nonfiction, there's literary nonfiction, and we're not going to take too much time to go into that, but if you want to look it up, you can look it up on Google and just have some fun. What I want to describe to you most are the differences between memoirs and autobiographies. So a lot of people say, I'm going to write my autobiography, which is really cool. And so they'll start with, I was born in the backwoods of Louisiana in 1967, right? And that's important because we actually, in an autobiography, it's like your whole life story. And it's all the left brain facts and all the right brain facts. And it's where your folks hail from, maybe for a couple of generations. Where did everybody come? What kind of influence did they have on you? Where did you go to school? Where did you go to church? Who were some of your greatest mentors? What were some of the things that you faced? What were all your business accolades? When did you get promoted? When did you start a business? What amazing social work have you done in your community? All of those things will be a factor. What I will share with you is autobiographies are not sellable for the average leader, okay? Autobiographies are usually done of very famous presidents, world leaders. Think Nelson Mandela. He's had 4 or 5 done. No, actually 6 now about his life, because people are intrigued by it. There are also high-level CEOs. People wanted to know about, the creators of Apple, the creators of Google, the creators of Amazon. Those types of very high-level leaders can have an autobiography and get away with it. Okay. For most of us, if we're going to write an autobiography, it's actually a legacy for our family. And we can also do it for our corporate environment. If in the culture, it's important for everyone to have an understanding of why we do what we do and how it affects the entire culture of this organization or company. Memoirs, however, are sellable on the market. Memoirs have become a very popular way for leaders, healers, teachers, speakers, motivators to be able to get out an understanding of their worldview. Memoirs have to be really good in order for them to sell on the market. If you think educated, if you think wild, if you think certain things. So that there has to be a profound and resounding story in a memoir for it to be looked at. And most of the time, people will need to have a platform. So if you're looking at especially traditional publishing, you will need to have at least 50,000 followers. And they like to see 100,000, 200,000, 500,000, 1 million. They love to see that. Even then, you've got to have both platform and a really compelling story for a traditional publisher to pick you up. One thing we have found, however, is that if you do a really great work on your memoir, that the grassroots effect of it begins to work miracles. And so even if you self-publish, and all of us can self-publish any time that we want to, that quality matters when it comes to memoirs. It really, really matters. And so does the vulnerability. Okay. So an autobiography is top to bottom, your life all the way through today and all of the major things that you've gone through. And then memoir, you're going to take a swatch of time that is all determined by that incredible story that you have to tell. And so that's the difference. And it's important for you to know. So we just discussed that. And I'm just going to share with you that here is Elizabeth Smart. And most of you have probably heard her story. Okay. This is the story that first came out. It became a New York Times bestseller and it was written with Chris Stewart, who is a congressman. And so she has this man who's writing her story, and he actually did a very compassionate job, which was good. And because their family was just so bombarded to know what had happened and needed, like people would just not let her alone until this came out. And it affected a lot of people's lives because people had followed it. She was this beautiful, innocent young girl. And all of a sudden she appears back and there's this whole scene with a bus driver who recognized her. And she was finally able to be rescued and freed from this maniac. Well, that was her story when she first arrived home. But she had a stronger story to tell of resiliency and the overcoming of not only the kidnapping, but also what happened when she came home and had to reclaim her life, herself. She's suddenly famous worldwide and not for something she would want. And so Where There's Hope is just a beautiful story of how to move forward when you have been traumatized or victimized. And so I just wanted you to see what is possible. Totally different story, totally different voice is Cheryl Strayed. And she'd been through some trauma too, but she goes out on the trail as this single woman to, she hits the Pacific Coast Trail, and you find out all the nitty gritty things about her life. Two very, very inspiring memoirs from two very, very different sorts of people and situations and voices. So what I'm wanting you to see is other people have written about being a hiker on the long trail. It's creating the uniqueness with what is your beauty. Cheryl, at one point, lost a shoe. She's up on this horrific cliff face. She's like struggling to survive, and she loses a shoe. So one other shoe's not going to help her. So she tosses the other one down, and then she starts back on the trail barefoot until she can get to a place where she does have a shoe. I want you to see how she used that. These are going to be the things that you're going to find from your own story where you use those things. So that's what makes it so wonderful. I'm going to skip over that because today we've got some more important things to discuss. But remember, I was telling you about Melissa, and I was telling you about Rebecca, and I was telling you about some incredible people, including Elizabeth Smart. There is great power in transparency. If in your book you don't cover up things, but you choose to address them, and I'm not saying air all your dirty laundry, but there is a power that comes with transparency, because then nobody can hold things over your head. They can't blackmail you and say, well, you didn't write about this. I'm just putting it out there that if there is a part of your life that really profoundly affected you, is to just be honest about it and then share the lessons that you learned from it, or weave it through, or tell people that's in another book. Okay. But there is a beauty in transparency. When Melissa Moore went on Dr. Phil for the first time, and then she went back on Oprah and Dr. Phil, she had never told anyone outside of a handful of people who her father was, because of how society would treat her. And then all of a sudden she reveals it in front of millions upon millions of people. And that was very vulnerable. It was also very inspiring for the audiences. And then it gave her a power she'd never had before, because she was hiding under the shadow of her past. Now all of a sudden, well, that secret's out of the water. And there was nothing else to hold her back. It's part of the reason why she became such an incredible leader. So all of you had that homework to go through your conflict character arc. So that helps in self-help. In memoir, it's vital. This is likely where you will find that core of your story. And it's also likely where you're going to find those other gossamer, beautiful threads that help to create a unique and different kind of story that is not out there on the market. Okay, so remember not to downplay that piece of your homework, and to really get clear on the lies and then every conflict that those lies created, because that's where you're going to find these beautiful rises and falls. And then I would also like to suggest is that the truth will be really important for you to reveal the truth, because when someone reads a memoir, and that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on, because you're all leaders, and some of you might write an autobiography and you would have all of this plus the extra. Okay, so I'm going to focus on this really beautiful creative nonfiction writing called memoir, and the truth is going to be really important with your rise. Conflict makes for incredible storytelling. I want to ask you, when was the last time you watched a really good movie and didn't have any conflict in it? Probably never. Do you know why? Conflict creates paradigms for us to bust through. Conflict creates something for us to overcome and rise over. Conflict is where we go from victim to victor. So if you're one who was taught that we never, we just got to keep that even keel, and then here's my rise. If you want to be believable, put in the conflict, allow for the drama. Okay. So here is where it gets really fun. I've got to do a little bit of annotation here. So hang on. It's different on each one. Oh, I'm not seeing how I can. This is going to be fun. Okay. Are you guys able to see my mouse as it moves? You are. Okay. So I want you to see that some of the best memoirs, some of the best autobiographies too, but some of these best books have been written as a 3-act play. So if you see the first one, Act 1, and if you want, you can go ahead and take a picture of this, but we do have it also in your workbook, that you have a hook, you have gripping, astonishing action, you let the readers fall in love with you. You got to decide, where am I going to start? That's called the inciting incident. And this is where something happens that calls you to the quest, calls you onto the adventure, and your life is never the same. So it usually has something to do with either your life or one of your family members or a loved one's life is in danger, or your lifestyle, life as you know it, has been threatened, and you are called to the quest. You've got to come do this thing. And then you got to make sure that you are the protagonist. So you're showing up as the hero or shero of your own story. And then this inciting incident is connected to your lies, the lies that you were told, or the lies that you believed about yourself, from your community, from your church, from, someone well-meaning, someone cruel. It doesn't matter where those lies came from, but how you had to overcome them. Okay. So we start, and I want you to see where the arrow is. You start here, and you got to have a hook. Everybody's got to have a hook. And as you rise, you're going to have a small rise. This is where we fall in love with your character. This is where we become intrigued in who you are. This is where you show some of that sass and flair, or brilliance, or ability to get out of something. But you're not a full victor yet. Okay. So you have a little bit of a turning point, a pinnacle moment, and then you have a fall. And I'm doing it in the wrong place. Sorry. So you start here. I'm doing that split screen. You start here with the hook, and then you begin to rise, and you have a small rise, and then you have a fall. Okay. But it's not a super deep fall. It's what we would call a dark evening fall. And then you rise again. And this time it's a higher rise. Okay. It's a higher, bigger rise because you're older. You've been using some skill sets that you have. You almost overcome the problem. You almost overcome the lie, but then something dramatic happens. And that is where you move down here into a dark night. And I hope you all can see that. So it's the deepest dark night. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where the hero's journey gets really juicy, because when you have been following a lie, there is an inner battle and an outer battle happening in your world. Okay, so that starts with those conflicts. So that means there's a bad guy or a bad situation like cancer or whatever it might be. Okay, that the world thinks all attorneys are horrific. So I want you to think about that. And then when you get into your dark night, this is where the inner battles and the outer battles meet. This is the dark cave, and this is where the dragon has you in its teeth. You just do not know how you're going to make another step out of the place that you're in. And so for Liddy, this might be where the corporate and the justice system has her in its teeth, and she does not know how she's going to rise out. This is also because that's an outer battle. This is also where you look in the mirror and you realize, I'm the dragon. I'm the dragon. So you have this outer battle, but then there's the inner battle, and you discover that which has been holding you back. You discover that which has been keeping you stuck and not allowing you to be the real hero or shero of your own journey. And now, knowing your complete and utter humanness, despite all of that, here in that dark cave, you begin your rise. And this is like right up here with Act 3. I want you to put a big star, like brilliant and shining. And it's not just a moment in nonfiction. In fiction, it can be like this grand, glorious, wonderful moment where everything happens. But for real people, it is, how did you get out of bed the next day? What did you say to that person that was suing you? What did you do when the rent was coming due? And how you got to the next step and the next step and the next step. I would imagine that those of you that are on the call today, that you recognize 2 or 3 of the greatest obstacles that you've ever overcome in your life, and you recognize how you overcame them, that you're seeing these rises and falls. And likely you know what your dark night has been, because you wouldn't be here today if you hadn't faced at least one of these cycles, right? So in leadership and in extraordinary people who say, I'm going to live juicy and I'm going to write juicy, I'm going to go out in the world, I'm going to kick butt, I'm going to take names. Sometimes you've lived through more than one of these journeys. And this is why sometimes you're like, I have 16 different stories to tell. How am I going to keep it to just one? And so you may have more than one book in you, and that's a good thing. I would definitely start with the story of your heart, the one that moves your blood, the one where the principles you learn through trial and error, through rising and falling, where you really came to know yourself. That one is the one to start with first. Greatest value, greatest passion, greatest way to get to know yourself and to learn not to be afraid of the dark or the monsters in the closet, because you already had to face yourself. Just don't neglect your rise, okay? Act 3 is where, man, you slay that dragon, you wield the sword, you grab this crown of understanding about yourself and wisdom of the world. And then you get this beautiful thing. This is another thing that I would like to share, because as leaders, you're here to motivate and inspire. And you also want to create more than readers. You want to create a movement, right? You don't want just readers. You want those that want to be a part of your movement, that understand your gifts, that have a desire to be this level of strength that you've learned to become, that have this brilliance that you don't hide under a bushel anymore, right? So they want that. That, my friends, is your elixir of life, that you have something so exquisitely earned in that dark night and choosing to rise. That is your special gift. It's your secret sauce. It's what makes you you as you go out into the world. So I'm going to invite you to think about that. When you think about writing your book, who do you want it to help? What have you gained so strongly that it is undeniable? When you have undeniable strengths, I would imagine for all of you, it wasn't something that you were just born with, that you had learning experiences that brought you this point, to the point where you're like, I have something to give and to share. That's when I know someone is no longer in victim, when they're like, I want to share this. I want to help people with this. I want to do something with this. That is a risen leader. That is powerful. All right. I'm going to give you an amazing secret. When my second book had that Oprah journey, I went back a little while later and I read the book and I went, I messed up the timeline. I had Melissa at one age, and then all of a sudden, for a little blip, She was older and then younger again. So there was this little issue that I had created, and I could not believe it because I slaved over that book and I double checked things as best I could. We had a whole funny thing when we knew we were going on Oprah and we were with a little publisher. This book became their #1 bestseller for 2 years running, and for good reason. But nobody called me on it on reviews or anything, but I found it, I saw it, I was horrified. And what I realized is for every good book, it's important for you to create a timeline. I developed a little program called Right Juicy, which has left brain and right brain ways to capture, like, here's all the events that, here's when I was born, here's when I was blessed or baptized, here's when I went to school, here's married and kids and blah, blah, blah. And then there's the right brain stories of here's my turning points and why certain things happen. And this is when this work right here is when people say, I like me better now. I understand me better now. For autobiographies and for memoirs, people have a tendency to just write down a collection of memories. And what happens in that, and why a lot of people don't finish them, is that they get stuck. They don't know how to put them together. Well, you are the glue and the thread of those stories. And when you put them down in order, all of a sudden you realize, I made that decision to marry him because of what he said. And when she did this, and then that started this whole trajectory. A lot of times it's things you forgot that you did, that you were, that you rose or you fell for a reason. And then the puzzle pieces of your story come together so beautifully. So if you can walk away from anything vitally important for this particular session, is do yourself a favor and write out a timeline and honor yourself in it. Because you might go, well, this doesn't mean anything. But when you see it in black and white, you'll see patterns. You'll also see likely other books. And it just makes it delicious because you'll go, okay, here's my mighty message, that core. Here's the threads I'm going to cover in this book. I've got 3 self-help books and I'm going to color code those. And then all of a sudden, you're not trying to write 16 books in one. You have something deeply filled with meaning that is going to affect someone halfway around the world and your own kids 50 years from now and others 100 years from now. This is a legacy book, okay? So don't neglect that lovely timeline. You have some beautiful workbook exercises that you'll be able to do homework at home. Just remember, every book has to start with a hook. And I will share this with you. There was a time that people would go into the first 3 chapters of a book, and if they weren't hooked by that time, they'd set it aside. People got busier. Then it was the first chapter of a book. People got busier. Then it was the first page of the book, and people got busier. You must start with a hook on the very first sentence. And I call them porcupine hooks, where they go in and they don't come out. You hook your reader and you don't let go. Okay. So it's got to be dang good, that hook. And then you go into inciting incidents. And I want you to think about the 3 greatest obstacles you've ever had to overcome and how you overcame them. And you will likely find rises and falls that will be your very most delicious book. Okay. Yesterday, we went through the importance of showing versus telling, right? And just how it is where you immerse people in the bathtub with you, you make sure that they have all of these elements, things that they just would not know. And so when I was telling you about Rebecca's book, and I mentioned we needed to start when she was young because most of the world has not grown up in polygamy. Well, let me backtrack that. There's actually, in worldwide, polygamy is actually quite widely accepted. In the United States, very few people have grown up in polygamy and so don't have an understanding of what it's like for a young girl to grow up, to keep sweet, to never complain, and to get to the point where every man in her life is more important than her. So a brother can make a decision for her, a life decision. A father can make a life decision, and a prophet can make a life decision, and other leaders that are male. But that she had no power to make most decisions. That's why she got a little sassy. But many of those women didn't. And people will say, why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you get out? When you grow up in that culture, if you get out, you're going to hell forever. And that's their belief system. And so it takes a lot of abuse, a lot of change for someone to leave that culture. We found that in many extreme cultures throughout the world. And so the reason I'm going into that is that we needed to show for her why she had this mindset. Just like this gentleman that I was telling you about, why he grew up thinking that casino owners were the emulation of everything he wanted to be. It's really important for people to have that understanding of who you are and what made you you, okay? And the showing of it is more important, especially in these kinds of stories. So some of you probably are like, how do I write a true story without throwing someone under the bus? So I'm going to tell you two things because I think it's important in this type of writing. Number one, Anne Lamott, who wrote, she's a fiction and nonfiction author, and she's extraordinary. And she said, if people didn't want you to write them in your book, they should have behaved better. So I want you to think about that. If people didn't want you to write them in your book, they should have behaved better. Also, I want to bring up something that's more on the sensitive side of things, and that is this. Are you the same person that you were 5 years ago? Likely not. And sometimes when we write a book, we hold people in those places. And so there is this delicate balance that you are the one that knows the truth of what gets to be exposed, what gets to be played with, what gets to be revealed, what gets to be on this quest, this journey, this adventure. And other people should not determine what that is. Warren Jeffs, we got to expose him. There's records about him. There's all this public material, right? Some of you may have a Warren in your family or in your community or society, and you may opt to expose that, or you may opt not to. That is a very, very personal decision. And so one of the things that I have found is that if you have a clear intention for your book, like this is to be a book of healing, this is to be a book of awakening, this is to be a book of transformation. If you have that clear intention, you will know how to write yourself and your characters. And the showing is such an important part, because let's just say you had someone that was bad, sick, and wrong in your life. And if you just tell us this person was bad, sick, and wrong, we have to decide if we're going to believe you. Kind of had that conversation yesterday. But if you show that, one of our authors did this incredible thing in a 5-minute exercise, and she portrayed that her little boys come home from school, they're having snacks, they got peanut butter on, they're getting messy, they're doing homework, they're playing and singing, there's music on the radio, they dance for a while, they're having a great time. And then the clock starts to near 5 o'clock, and all of a sudden the whole tone of the house changes. And kids get scrubbed down, their clothes get changed, the clothes are thrown into the hamper and the lid is on. The counters are wiped down to there's not a single spot, right? The toys are all meticulously put away. There's nothing on there. The vacuum comes out. The dinner is in the oven. The timer is on. And then the garage door opens. That is a show me story. She didn't have to say anything. She showed us. And so in this showing of both redeeming qualities is a great way. Like, how do people treat the less fortunate? How do people treat those, who are considered less than them, the maids, the waitresses, the carmen, whatever it might be? And showing someone's actual integrity is amazing. So I want you to be thinking about those pieces. and just how incredible a show me can be. So we went through this yesterday, but now you're thinking in terms of an entire book, okay? So have fun practicing your author's voice. Make sure that what you say in your head is very authentic to you. Have fun with dramatic dialogue. Have fun with descriptions and verbs. And remember to write juicy. Have all of the the senses involved: taste, smell, touch, feel. I have touch and feel. Hearing and vision. Most first-time authors, they only write what they can see. But there is this thing called the golden cycle, and they call it that in fiction, but it's really juicy in narrative nonfiction and memoir, where you share with us all of those senses, not in one sentence ever, not in one paragraph ever, but you weave it through in an extraordinary way. So practice what your author's voice sounds like. Practice differentiation in conversation, between one person's dialogue and yours. What are phrases that you use that nobody else uses, and remember that call and response in dialogue. He said, she said, but do it juicy, do it beautiful, have some fun with it. Okay. I'm going to move through this because we covered this yesterday. Oh, and just thank you. When we get to, when you get to a place where you're about halfway to 3/4, sometimes a little further in your author journey, in writing a memoir in particular, but also in autobiography, there comes a point when you recognize that there's a deeper thread of story than you realized. And part of it is because you've been doing the work. You're understanding yourself. You're getting more vulnerable, and you're celebrating these sides of you that you hadn't seen before. Sometimes people will allow a publishing deadline to get in the way of that. That's okay. That's okay. But I would suggest that you listen to those challenges to deepen your story. As I mentioned yesterday, it's heartbreaking to me when someone spends time, when they fillet themselves like a fish out on paper for everyone to see, and then they don't like it, or it didn't truly reflect the person that they've become. If you have deepening moments, write them down, put them into your phone, whatever it takes, and then go back and allow yourself to take a little bit of time to strengthen those threads of story. You will be really, really happy that you did. I was working on Gary Lee Price's. He's the one with the Statue of Responsibility. We had a couple books this last week that we know are going to be made into movies. We even have a producer looking at them, and this is one of them. There was the story that first started to be, and then there was the story that came to be. And I know that there was no accident. I felt the deepening, and so did Gary. And it was something that we chose to honor between the two of us. And this was just sent out for beta reviews, and I'm still teary about it. And the reason is because the specific things that are being, oh my gosh, I've been reading this, I can't put it down. These are these, and they're reflecting back to us the things that are touching them so much, what they remember from a similar situation or story, what they're being inspired by came from the deepening. And this is when you have a transformational tale that has the ability to rock the nation, to change the world. Stories have power. Believe in the power of your story to change the world, and I promise that it will. So remember, it's time to win. And with every great story, with every great painting, the artist has to put down the brush. The author has to say the end. We get perfectionistic, and I will tell you this, perfection is poison. Rebecca taught me something a long time ago that I will never forget. And I often have it here on my desktop because I have to remember it. And it is better done than perfect. If you are going to make strides in the world, if you're going to go out and you're going to create something and make it happen, allow the deepening, but get it out there. The only way that it can change lives is if you do it. The only way that it can change lives is if you do it and get vulnerable and get it out there. So I'm just excited about what you're doing, what you're choosing, and where you're headed. So please do remember that we have a link in the chat if you want to sign up and just talk about a big aha, a breakthrough, bring one burning question like, oh, I just need to know this thing. And then if you want any questions or suggestions or advice on your next steps, I love to do that. So it will be great. And then I talked to you yesterday about don't neglect your date with destiny, rewrite at least 5 times. Do you see I said 5 and it says 3? Authors who choose to have really good books will usually rewrite at least 5 times, but don't go crazy. And then remember the importance of beta readers for that best seller quality and allow for that. Another invitation to our Inspired Legacy Publishing and our retreat that's coming up. Super excited. And never, ever, ever forget, whether you traditional publish or you self or indie publish, you've got to be visible. Publishers are looking for a sure thing. You've got to make yourself a sure thing. And that means that if you've been hiding under a rock, it's time for you to come out. It's time for you to be visible. It's time for you to own your story. Writing your story, wow, it really helps. It helps you to express yourself more. You know your signature story that you can use in speeches and on blogs and in other forms of artwork and videos, etc. It helps. But you've also got to raise your visibility, make sure you have a platform. Linda has extraordinary people that she could refer you to that will help you build your platform, become even more visible, do great things in the world. People have to see you to know you exist. They have to see you and your book to know that you are a world leader. So don't neglect that visibility. And so I suggest 15 minutes a day working on your platforms if you haven't already. Expand your LinkedIn, expand in Women's Leadership Global and C-Suite, expand in all the places that you have. You don't have to be a master of social media and everything, but you want to be in at least 2 places where people know who you are and what you stand for, and that you continue to build those.